Tonight we are going to wander the crooked, cobblestoned alleys of Prague in the 17th century, back when every corner of the city glowed with the soft, stubborn light of handmade candles. The air smells of damp stone, wood smoke, and, if we're being honest, a generous hint of boiled tallow that you'd probably rather not sniff too deeply. You drift past shadows taller than yourself, and every door frame seems to lean just a little too far into the street. The darkness presses heavily, so much so that if you tried to survive without a flame, you'd probably stub your toe on the very first step and never make it to breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time of night or day is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trail deeper into the city, where light is precious. Every candle in Prague feels like a lifeline, flickering against the long Central European winters. In the early 1600s, the streets are rarely safe after sundown. Torches burn low in iron brackets, but they're expensive to maintain. Instead, households huddle around little points of flame, candles made of tallow from sheep or cattle, or beeswax if you can afford the good stuff. The walls of shops and inns glow with stubby little sticks that drip as fast as they burn, leaving hardened wax puddles like frozen teardrops. You notice how fragile this world is, dependent on such tiny flames. A candle can illuminate a whole dinner table, or it can tip over and burn the table down. Historians still argue whether households preferred open lamps or candles, but the truth is both had their hazards, and most families stuck with whatever their purses could handle. And unless you were nobility, don't expect beeswax's sweet honeyed perfume. You were stuck with tallow's greasy, smoky tang. Think of it as the 17th century equivalent of eating generic cereal while the rich folk are spooning imported chocolate. Still, even the poorest homes find comfort in those little flames. Imagine you trudging through snow, pushing into a tavern, and suddenly being surrounded by warm flickers bouncing off mugs of ale. A single candle perched near the hearth makes shadows dance like they're alive, writhing along beams of oak. It's not Netflix, but it keeps you entertained. The city itself thrives on those shadows. Prague in this century is a place of contrasts: stone bridges spanning the Vltava River, Gothic towers stabbing into the fog, and crooked wooden stalls pressed into alleys. At night, the river runs black, reflecting pinpricks of candlelight from windows across the water. This is the glow of survival, of prayer, of labor, and if you're lucky, of love. You hear the shuffle of boots behind you, and you quicken your pace. Candles don't just illuminate, they also mark who can be trusted. Some inns are bright enough to feel safe, while others keep things suspiciously dim. Guild rules try to regulate candle quality so that they burn evenly, but let's be honest, plenty of tavern keepers buy knockoffs. One quirky tidbit: it wasn't unheard of for unscrupulous chandlers to stretch their tallow with fish oil, making candles that sputtered and smelled like a harbor at low tide. Customers complained, but if you were already a little tipsy, maybe you didn't notice, or maybe you thought the herring was just extra seasoning in the air. As you keep walking, you pass the looming silhouette of St. Vitus Cathedral. Even from outside, you sense how candlelight transforms worship. Step inside, and you'd see hundreds of flames shimmering on altars, glowing against gilded icons, and filling the cavernous vaults with living light. In a city this dark, candles become more than tools, they're symbols. They stand for hope, for eternal life, for the community gathered in shadows. Without them, services would feel empty. Historians still debate whether candle donations in churches were sincere acts of piety or just clever ways to buy social clout. But either way, the guilds supplied them, making sure the faithful never prayed in darkness. You glance up at the windows of a wealthier home. The glow inside is golden, smoother, richer. That's beeswax, no question. The wealthy not only enjoy sweeter-smelling rooms, but their candles burn longer and cleaner. They can afford chandeliers of 30 or 40 wicks, lighting banquets that last into the small hours. Meanwhile, in your cramped rented room, you'd be thrilled if your stub of tallow lasted through supper without sputtering out. The difference is almost cruel, like comparing a diamond chandelier to a flashlight that keeps flickering. The guilds know this divide all too well. Candle making in Prague isn't just a craft, it's a matter of strict regulation. If you were an apprentice, you'd be slogging through years of wax melting, wick cutting, and endless cleaning before you earned the right to call yourself a master. And we'll be stepping into that world soon. But for now, here in the open streets, you're just a customer, eyeing the glow of workshops where hot wax steams the windows and the smell of honey or tallow wafts into the cold. Even so, you can't help but feel wonder at how fragile yet resilient this world is. Every candle holds within it hours of labor, resources from farms and hives, rules from guild halls, and hopes from the people who light it. That little flicker isn't just fire, it's community, survival, and craft. Without it, the city would be swallowed by the dark. And so, with your feet echoing softly on cobblestones, you continue deeper, toward the heavy wooden doors of the Candlemaker's Guildhall, where we'll soon peek inside and discover how this flickering world is kept alive. You press your palm against a swollen wooden door, its iron studs cold against your skin. The hinges groan as it creaks open, and suddenly the murmur of the street fades behind you. You step into the Candlemaker's Hall, the guild's inner sanctum, where the rules of Prague's glowing world are written, argued, and enforced. It's not grand like a cathedral, but it carries a kind of weight all its own, long benches worn smooth by elbows, smoke-stained rafters, and the faint mingling sense of wax, tallow, and beer. You don't sit down yet, you hover near the threshold, watching. A group of masters in heavy coats gather around a table littered with parchment scrolls. They argue over regulations, over apprenticeships, over the endless question of who can and cannot sell light in the city. Historians still argue whether these guild meetings were democratic debates or more like an exclusive club where the wealthiest dominated decisions. Either way, if you were here as an apprentice, you'd probably keep your mouth shut, nod a lot, and hope not to be noticed. The guild is a fortress of order in a city that can feel chaotic. To sell candles legally, you need their blessing. To become a journeyman, you need their approval. And to rise to master, you must prove yourself in a way that feels almost like a medieval reality TV finale. Picture a nervous young chandler presenting a perfectly molded beeswax candle, while a panel of stern masters sniffs, pokes, and squints at it. If it droops, cracks, or smokes too much, congratulations, you're sent back to melt more wax for another few years. You wander deeper, running your fingers along the cool plaster walls. The guild hall doubles as a kind of social club. There are wooden tankards stacked on a shelf, ready for the drinking bouts that follow meetings. Quirky tidbit here, it was not uncommon for guildsmen to finish serious business about candle pricing and then immediately challenge each other to beer drinking contests. The winner might strut around bragging until the next meeting, while the loser, well, he still had to wake up at dawn to stir a vat of smelly tallow. Nothing like the hangover tallow combo to test your devotion to the craft. You overhear one of the masters lecturing about quality standards. The guild prides itself on protecting buyers from fraud. Every wick must be spun evenly, every candle weighed carefully. A dishonest chandler caught selling short-weight candles could face fines or even expulsion. And since the streets were dark, your reputation was everything. Customers would notice quickly if their candle burned half as long as promised. The guild wasn't just about brotherhood, it was about protecting a monopoly. If you weren't in, you were out. Try selling candles without membership, and you might find your workshop mysteriously accidentally sabotaged, or your wares confiscated. You pause, imagining yourself as a nervous apprentice sitting in the back, your hands raw from twisting wicks. The rules are strict. years of servitude, tiny pay, endless chores. You carry buckets of wax until your arms ache. You polish tools until they gleam. And at night, you're sent to sweep the workshop floors, scraping away dried drips of wax that cling like barnacles. Historians still debate whether these apprenticeships were truly educational or just glorified cheap labor. Spoiler, probably a bit of both. The guild also has its rituals. On feast days, members march together through the city, banners flapping, candles in hand, reminding everyone that they're the keepers of Prague's light. In those moments, the guild is more than an association, it's a performance of power. They're not just workers, they're guardians of an essential craft. And if you squint, you might even spot a proud master sneaking a glance to make sure everyone notices just how important they are. One corner of the hall is plastered with lists, names of members, names of apprentices, even records of fines. It's basically a 17th century bulletin board of shame. Fail to follow the rules? Your name gets scribbled there, immortalized in ink until you redeem yourself. And imagine the gossip that followed. Prague was already a city buzzing with rumors, and the candlemakers were not immune. Did you hear? Jan was fined for selling underweight beeswax tapers. It's the 17th century version of a viral TikTok scandal, just with more wax and less dancing. As you stand watching the masters argue over pricing, you realize how fragile their dominance is. Other guilds, soap boilers, chandlers from nearby towns, even sneaky black market sellers, are always trying to cut into their profits. The candlemakers guard their privileges fiercely, insisting that only they have the skill and tradition to provide true quality. Historians still argue whether guilds truly preserved craftsmanship or simply kept prices inflated by choking out competition. From where you stand, it looks like a bit of both. Pride in craft, sure, but also a serious love of coin. And yet, amid the rules and rivalries, there's a sense of belonging here. Imagine trudging through the cold streets at night, then stepping into this warm hall, tankard in hand, surrounded by fellow craftsmen who understand the stink of tallow and the sweetness of beeswax. It's not glamorous, but it's family. A bell clangs, signaling the close of discussion. Papers are rolled up, voices soften, and someone cracks a barrel of ale. The hall shifts from stern courtroom to cozy tavern in seconds. Laughter fills the air, bouncing off the rafters. You slip toward the doorway, the scent of warm beer and wax trailing after you. Outside, the night embraces you again. But now you carry with you the echo of that hall, the knowledge that every flicker of light in Prague is guarded by rules, rituals, and the stubborn pride of those men inside. The door swings shut behind you, and your footsteps lead toward the workshops, where the real magic of wax and wick waits to unfold. The air grows warmer as you push into a workshop, the kind of space where candlelight is not only sold but also born. Immediately your nose wrinkles, this is not a perfume shop. Huge vats of bubbling tallow simmer over open fires, giving off a greasy, smoky scent that clings to your hair and clothes. You probably won't survive this without smelling like a stew of beef scraps for the rest of the week. Still, you take a cautious step closer, because here is where raw fat and beeswax become the neat little sticks of light that rule Prague's nights. A journeyman stirs the vat with a long wooden paddle, careful not to splash. Drops hiss when they hit the coals. Tallow, rendered from sheep or cattle fat, is the cheapest option. It's pliable, plentiful, and, unfortunately, it stinks when it burns. Beeswax, on the other hand, glows with a golden light, burns longer, and smells faintly of honey. But beeswax is expensive, imported in bulk from hives across the countryside, and only the wealthy can afford to buy it in quantity. Historians still argue whether demand for beeswax in religious institutions was the main driver of its value or if secular banquets were equally guilty of inflating prices. Either way, the stuff was worth its weight in silver. You watch as the workers dip wicks into vats, again and again, each layer of wax cooling before the next is added. It's a rhythm: dip, lift, drip, cool. The room fills with the faint crackle of fire, the drip of wax, and the shuffle of boots. Apprentices scurry about with buckets of water, cloths, and extra wick spools. Their hands are red from scrubbing hardened wax off every surface. One quirky tidbit: apprentices were sometimes told to chew on raw beeswax during long shifts to strengthen their jaws and keep them busy, though whether this actually worked or was just a master's joke is, well, still debatable. On a side table, rows of molds wait. These are used for fancier candles, uniform, symmetrical, and perfect for noble tables. The molds are made of wood or tin, and each must be greased carefully to release the finished candle. Too much grease, and the candle looks blotchy. Too little, and you risk shattering it on removal. The masters hover over these with hawk-like eyes, because a cracked beeswax taper isn't just a candle, it's wasted money. And if you were the apprentice who cracked one, you'd be hearing about it for weeks. The smell of herbs drifts faintly from another corner. A small pile of rosemary, thyme, and lavender rests near a pot. Sometimes candle makers add herbs, oils, or even powdered resins to their wax to mask the odor of tallow. Did it help? Slightly. But more importantly, it made the product feel exotic, like a luxury upgrade. If you lived in Prague and bought one of these, you could brag at dinner, "Ah yes, my candle has notes of rosemary." It's basically the 17th century version of flexing about your pumpkin spice latte. You reach out and touch a finished candle on the shelf. It's smooth, slightly oily, and surprisingly heavy. The wick protrudes neatly, cut to just the right length. Too short, and it won't light. Too long, and it will smoke. Guild rules mandate precision. Candles aren't just slapped together, they're crafted like tools, meant to burn evenly and predictably. Fail to meet those standards, and your candles could sputter, drip excessively, or worse, spark a fire. And in a city built largely of wood, fire is every citizen's nightmare. Still, for all the seriousness, the workshop hums with life. Apprentices whisper jokes while carrying buckets, a master hums a folk tune under his breath, and a stray cat naps dangerously close to the warmth of a vat. You suspect it's not the first cat to sneak in here, probably lured by both heat and the occasional dropped scrap of fat. Imagine explaining to your landlord why your cat smells like a candle shop. Oh, she's just diversifying her career path. The longer you watch, the more you appreciate the balance of science and superstition here. Candle making looks simple: melt, dip, mold, but every decision matters. The ratio of fat to wax, the thickness of the wick, the temperature of the room. Too hot, and the wax won't layer properly. Too cold, and it cracks. Masters know these details instinctively, passed down like secret recipes. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was true alchemy or just generations of trial and error, but either way, the result was a dependable flame in an unreliable world. Near the doorway, you spot bundles of finished candles tied with twine, ready for sale. Some are plain, for ordinary households. Others are long and elegant, destined for the cathedral's altar or a noble's banquet table. They'll travel out into the city, tucked under arms, carried in wagons, or balanced carefully in baskets. Each one carries with it the sweat of apprentices, the careful eye of masters, and the lingering scent of smoke and honey. The journeyman stirs his vat again, and you notice his hands are thick with calluses, his skin speckled with old wax burns. Candle making is not glamorous. It's repetitive, smelly, and sometimes dangerous. But it is also indispensable. In a world without electricity, every flicker of light begins here, in this hot, sticky room where fat is melted into order. Without these workers, the city would fall into chaos every sunset. As you back away from the workshop, the sounds and smells cling to you. You know that what you've just witnessed is more than craft, it's survival, it's ritual, and it's the invisible foundation of Prague's glowing nights. And now, with your shoes sticking slightly from the wax-spattered floor, you wander toward the church spires, where these handmade flames will soon take on a very different meaning. You step back into the chill night air, but soon the bells of St. Nicholas beckon you inside, and you find yourself pushing through the heavy church doors. Instantly, the world changes. The dim, drafty streets give way to a golden haze where hundreds of candles burn in tall iron stands, on altars, and before painted icons. The smell of beeswax thickens in the air, carrying with it a sweetness that almost drowns out the tang of incense. You pause, letting the warmth wash over you, because here candlelight isn't just practical, it's spiritual, symbolic, and, if you look closely, deeply political. Your eyes wander upward. The vaulted ceiling is lost in shadow, but the flickering light makes saints' faces carved in stone seem alive, their eyes glistening as though they are watching you. Candles are everywhere, gifts from the faithful, payments for prayers, tokens of gratitude for answered petitions. A woman kneels nearby, pressing a coin into the sexton's hand for a taper she places before the Virgin's image. Historians still argue whether these gestures were heartfelt devotion or social performance, a way to be seen giving piously. In a city like Prague, where status and faith were entangled, the flames served both God and gossip. At the high altar, massive beeswax pillars stand tall. These are not ordinary candles. Each weighs pounds, carved with ribbons and gilded crests, symbols of noble donors. Their flames burn steady and bright, hardly wavering. They are as much declarations of wealth as they are offerings to heaven. You can almost hear the whisper, "Look at me, look at my devotion, oh, and by the way, notice how much money I had to spend on this candle." The choir begins to sing, and the glow makes the music shimmer. Imagine trying to pray here in darkness. Without these lights, the entire cathedral would be an echoing cave, terrifying rather than comforting. One quirky tidbit: in some churches, they experimented with using mirrored reflectors behind candles to magnify their glow, an early attempt at stage lighting for God. Whether it impressed the saints or not, it certainly impressed the congregation. As you walk slowly along the pews, you notice smaller shrines tucked into corners. Each flickers with its own cluster of little flames. Some burn steadily, others sputter, their smoke leaving smudges on the stone. The faithful whisper prayers as they light them, hopes for health, for love, for protection from the plague that seems always to linger somewhere on the horizon. You realize these candles aren't just symbols, they're contracts. Light a flame, and it's as though you're binding yourself to heaven in molten wax. And yet, not all flames here are innocent. The church also records payments for candle use, careful ledgers noting who gave what. Candles are income. They keep the clergy fed, clothed, and supplied. Historians still debate whether the church relied too heavily on this trade, but from where you stand, it's obvious. Without candles, the cathedral would be both physically and financially darker. Near the front, a boy in a ragged cloak squints at the glowing altar. He can't afford a candle of his own, so he lingers near those already burning, letting their light fall on his folded hands. It's a stark reminder, candles are privilege. For some, they are offerings, for others, unreachable luxuries. It's almost cruel that something so small, a flicker of wax and wick, can mark the line between wealth and poverty. You shift your gaze toward a side chapel, where a priest carefully trims wicks with a pair of long scissors. Trimming keeps flames even and prevents excessive smoke. It's part of the quiet choreography of the church service, almost invisible to most, but essential. And it's a reminder that candles are living things, they need tending, care, and constant attention. Leave one alone too long, and it smokes out or topples. Some whispered that the strength of a flame mirrored the strength of your prayer. If it sputtered, maybe God wasn't listening. The choir swells, and the whole space seems alive with shimmering shadows. You imagine yourself as a worshipper, eyes closed, your hopes carried upward by these flames. The experience is overwhelming, not just faith, but theater. Historians still argue whether the sensory overload of light, music, and incense was designed to inspire devotion or simply to keep people too dazzled to question authority. Either way, you can't deny its effect. A small chuckle escapes you when you think of how modern folks complain about electricity bills. At least no one today has to calculate how many sheep had to die to light up Sunday Mass. Picture telling your landlord, "Sorry, I can't pay rent this month. I bought 6 feet of beeswax for the choir loft." Slowly, the music fades, and people begin to trickle out into the night, their footsteps echoing across the stone. But the flames remain, stubborn and soft, still flickering against the silence. You linger, because it's hard to look away. This is where light transcends utility, becoming a language of faith, of social rank, and of longing. And yet, as you finally step back into the cold street, you realize that outside the church, those same flames have another life, one of commerce, bargaining, and everyday survival. The glow of worship fades behind you, replaced by the raucous calls of vendors in the market square, where candles are weighed and sold like fish, bread, and cloth. You turn toward that noise, ready to follow the light into the marketplace. The bells fade behind you as you wander into the heart of Prague's market square, where the world of candles transforms from solemn faith to sheer commerce. The space is alive with noise, merchants shouting prices, chickens flapping in wicker cages, and the clang of iron scales weighing goods. And tucked between stalls of fish, cheese, and spices are the chandlers, the candle sellers, hawking their bundles of wax and tallow to anyone with coin. The scent here is a strange cocktail: smoked meat, river mud, damp wool, and, of course, the sweet-sour undertone of fresh candles. You pause at a stall where a burly woman with wax-stained fingers arranges neat bundles of tallow tapers. Her voice booms over the crowd, "3 for a groschen. Burn longer than your last ones, I swear it." You watch as she plucks up one stubby candle, tilts it toward a skeptical customer, and snaps it in half to prove its density. Historians still argue whether markets like this were truly open to all guild members, or if backroom deals quietly kept prime spots reserved for the most well-connected. Whatever the truth, this stall owner knows her game, her smile sharp, her hands quick, her eyes sharper still. Further along, a rival seller undercuts her price, his stall piled high with slightly smaller candles. A quarrel sparks, customers glance nervously, wondering whose flame will last longer. Guild inspectors patrol sometimes, but here in the open market, it's hard to police every trick. One quirky tidbit: some sellers were notorious for hollowing out the bottoms of their candles and plugging them with clay, making them appear full weight but burn out early. Imagine the disappointment when your evening supper ends in darkness because your candle was literally half dirt. Children dart between stalls carrying baskets of candles wrapped in linen, delivering them to wealthier homes. You notice one boy stop to admire a tray of beeswax tapers gleaming golden in the weak winter light. He reaches out, then quickly withdraws his hand. He knows those are far beyond his family's means. Beeswax here costs several times more than tallow, and only nobles or clergy buy it in bulk. For most, candles are a careful investment, bought sparingly, lit only when needed, and snuffed quickly to preserve every precious inch. You watch as a housewife counts coins in her palm, hesitating before choosing a single tallow candle. She tucks it into her apron like a treasure, no less important than bread or salt. And in a way, it is, without light, evening chores stall, meals go half prepared, children go unwashed. Candle markets aren't frivolous, they're survival. Historians still argue whether families of modest means could truly afford enough candles for daily life, or if most simply learned to function in near darkness. From the look of this housewife's face, you suspect it was the latter. A sudden commotion draws your eye. A man has been caught trying to sell imported candles from outside the city, illegal unless approved by the guild. His wares are quickly seized, his protests drowned out by jeers. The guild's grip on the market is firm. Break their rules, and your business vanishes. You imagine him trudging home empty-handed, muttering about unfair monopolies, and maybe, just maybe, planning to try again under cover of night. And yet, despite the strict control, the market buzzes with life. Candles here are more than goods, they're gossip starters. Which noble is buying up beeswax for a wedding? Which monastery ordered 2 cartloads of tapers for a feast day? People whisper, speculate, and exaggerate. News spreads with the flames themselves, carried from market to kitchen to guild hall. A vendor near the fountain demonstrates a novelty, spiral-shaped candles, twisted like corkscrews. They don't burn any better, but they look impressive on a dining table. You chuckle softly. It seems even in the 17th century, people couldn't resist a gimmick. Imagine your neighbor leaning across the stew pot. Oh, you still use straight candles? How quaint. Your shoes crunch on straw scattered to soak up mud, and the air grows thicker as more buyers crowd in. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the stalls, and you realize with a small shiver that many of these candles will be lit tonight, just hours from now, glowing in homes all across Prague. Each one carries a story, lit for supper, for prayer, for safety, or maybe just to chase away loneliness. As you turn from the market, you spot a guild apprentice struggling under a bundle nearly bigger than himself. He stumbles, rights it, and keeps going, his master barking at him to hurry. You can't help but think of what life is like for these young workers, serving both in the hall and the market, sweating through endless tasks while dreaming of the day they'll earn freedom. That thought tugs you onward, away from the square, toward the dim side streets where apprentices live and labor in shadows of their masters. The alleys narrow as you leave the chatter of the marketplace behind, and the sound of your boots shifts to a muffled thud against packed earth and scattered straw. Here the houses lean close together, crooked beams jutting like elbows. It smells of boiled cabbage, wet wool, and somewhere, faintly, the sharp tang of tallow. This is where apprentices of the candle-making guild live, wedged between the grandeur of the master's workshops and the barest edge of poverty. You push open a small workshop door and step inside. Heat slaps your face. The air is heavy with smoke and the sour-sweet reek of animal fat. A boy not much older than 13 heaves a bucket of half-melted tallow across the floor, his arms trembling. He spills a few drops and winces, knowing his master's eyes are everywhere. You probably wouldn't survive 1 week of this, you'd be out the door after the first wax burn, complaining that OSHA should really look into this. The life of an apprentice is grueling. Before dawn, he's awake, sweeping floors or fetching water. All day, he stirs vats, cuts wicks, hauls wood, and scrubs hardened wax off tools until his knuckles crack. Food is plain, rye bread, onions, maybe broth if he's lucky. And freedom? Forget it. Guild rules bind him to years of service before he can even dream of journeyman status. Historians still argue whether apprenticeships were genuine opportunities or just a fancy way of saying cheap labor, but standing here, watching his sweat drip onto the floor, you have a strong guess. A master chandler barks orders from the far side of the room, his voice sharp as the iron tongs in his hand. He isn't cruel exactly, but his standards are relentless. If the wax isn't stirred evenly, the candle will warp. If the wick isn't cut true, the flame will smoke. Apprentices live in constant tension, hoping their mistakes go unnoticed. One quirky tidbit: punishment for sloppy work sometimes involved making the offender scrape wax drips off the workshop floor until midnight. Picture a teenager on his knees, chiseling wax while muttering curses that history books politely leave out. And yet, apprenticeships weren't all misery. In rare quiet moments, the boys snicker together, trading jokes while carrying buckets or daring each other to touch cooling wax with bare fingers. They sleep in cramped quarters, often above the workshop itself, their dreams filled with smoke and flame. Bonds form, shared suffering has a way of knitting people together. Years later, when some of them become journeymen, those friendships will become lifelong alliances. But the path to freedom is long. After years of service, an apprentice must produce a masterpiece, literally, a candle that proves his skill. This isn't just any candle, it must be flawless, often made of beeswax, smooth, symmetrical, and capable of burning evenly for hours. Guild masters inspect it like jewelers examining a diamond. Imagine the nerves, years of sweat condensed into one trembling moment as your candle is lit before the panel. If it sputters or collapses, back you go, condemned to carry buckets until your arms give out. Freedom, when it comes, is sweet. Journeymen gain wages and the right to travel, working in different shops to hone their craft. And when one finally rises to master, tradition demands a freedom feast. The new master hosts fellow guild members in a raucous celebration filled with roasted meats, barrels of ale, and, naturally, plenty of candles. The symbolism is thick. After years in the shadows, the apprentice steps into the light, literally, surrounded by the flames of his own making. Historians still argue whether these feasts were sincere welcomes or just thinly veiled excuses for drunken revelry, but either way, they were legendary nights. Back in the workshop, you watch the boy finally drop his empty bucket, his face pale with exhaustion. He glances at the glowing rows of finished tapers on the shelf. Maybe, in some quiet corner of his mind, he imagines his own freedom feast someday, with his name carved onto the guild rolls. For now, though, it's back to the grind. He bends to sweep wax shavings from the floor, his broom rasping against the boards. You step outside, the cooler air a relief after the stifling heat. From here, the sounds of Prague drift again, the clang of distant bells, the chatter of taverns, the bark of dogs. And as you walk, you carry the image of those apprentices with you, tired, dirty, but holding on to the tiniest flicker of hope that one day, their work will buy them a place at the master's table. The street bends toward a row of shops where candles smell not of smoke and grease, but of herbs, oils, and exotic resins. Prestige and experimentation wait there, promising that a candle might be more than just light, it might also be luxury. You wander toward the more upscale quarter of Prague, where the streets are cleaner, the stones smoother, and the air carries hints of lavender, clove, and imported resin instead of the acrid tang of tallow. Here, the candle world is a different universe. These are the luxury candles, the ones that signal status, wealth, and refined taste. Merchants don't just sell wax, they sell ambience, prestige, and sometimes, a little vanity. You probably won't survive a day trying to keep up with the nuances of this trade without tripping over something extravagant. A master chandler greets you with a polite nod, and you notice immediately the difference from the workshop apprentices. His robes are fine, dusted with a shimmer of powdered wax from demonstration candles. Behind glass windows, candles of all shapes and sizes glow like liquid gold in the afternoon light. There are spiral tapers, carved beeswax pillars, and even miniature replicas of famous Prague landmarks. Some flicker with subtle perfumes, rose, cedar, amber, carefully infused by dripping essential oils into the molten wax. Historians still argue whether these scented candles were for genuine pleasure or simply a display of wealth and cultural literacy, but you can't deny their charm. The chandler picks up a pair of tall, tapering beeswax candles and holds them to the light. They burn evenly, the glow unwavering, and you notice the slight honey scent trapped in the wax. One quirky tidbit: some wealthy patrons commissioned candles that would burn for entire feasts or ceremonies, sometimes taking hours, even days, to fully consume. They were more performance than utility, a spectacle of endurance and patience. You can almost hear a noble saying, "Yes, my candle lasts longer than my cousin's marriage." You move closer to a side table where tiny figurines made of wax stand in delicate formation, dancers, horses, and even tiny carriages. The attention to detail is mind-boggling. Each figurine could melt at a touch, yet they are meant to be handled during celebrations, gifts, or religious ceremonies. Apprentices back in the cramped workshop would never see this kind of artistry. Their world is function, not flair. A bell chimes from the neighboring street, and you catch sight of a patron entering the shop, a noble woman draped in velvets and furs, her fingers brushing over the polished wax. She selects a pair of honey-colored tapers, handing over coins without hesitation. The chandler bows and wraps the candles in fine paper. It's a transaction wrapped in ceremony, a performance that signals status as much as utility. Historians still debate whether such purchases were acts of genuine devotion or simply conspicuous consumption, but the woman seems content either way. You wander further, noticing how each candle here carries a story. Some are for private devotion, some for lavish feasts, some for public display. A stack of candles with carved religious scenes waits for a monastery, while another, infused with exotic oils, will likely end up on a noble's dinner table. The contrast is stark. One flame serves God, another serves social theatre. You notice apprentices outside, carrying bundles of unfinished candles to the master's shop. Their steps are hurried, their faces tight with concentration. They glimpse the polished displays, the gilded perfection behind glass, and you imagine the mixture of awe and envy swelling inside them. This is what mastery looks like, what years of sweat, mistakes, and scraped knuckles aim toward. At the far end of the room, a small stove keeps the wax warm and pliable. The master demonstrates how to add pigments for color: reds, blues, and greens, all carefully measured to avoid ruining the candle. One tiny misstep, and hours of work are lost. You lean closer, fascinated, because it's easy to forget that something so seemingly simple as a candle involves chemistry, patience, and artistry. A curious scent catches your attention, frankincense mingled with cedar. You discover a tray of ceremonial candles for processions, long, sturdy, and designed to withstand wind while carrying light. In some churches, these candles were even hollowed slightly to allow air to circulate, keeping the flame steady. Quirky, yes, but ingeniously practical. The sun dips lower, casting amber across the polished wax. Shadows stretch across the walls, and the room glows softly, as if the candles themselves are breathing. You realize that in Prague, candles are more than light, they're tools of culture, status, and devotion, simultaneously humble and luxurious. And as you step back into the cobblestone streets, you carry with you the knowledge that every flicker you've seen, whether in a smoky workshop or a gilded shop, represents not just labor, but ambition, artistry, and centuries of tradition. The evening hush begins to settle, and you sense the city preparing for nightfall. Soon, the street lamps will be lit with tallow, candles will flicker in homes, and the city will glow in a mosaic of private and public lights. Your footsteps echo as you move toward one of the smaller alleyways where secrets of the trade are whispered, and the apprenticeship world continues unseen, humming with the quiet rhythm of molten wax. The alley narrows further, the taller buildings leaning in as if to whisper secrets to one another, and you find yourself stepping into a quieter, almost hidden corner of the guild's operations. Here, innovation meets necessity, where the candle makers experiment, tweak, and occasionally fail in pursuit of perfection. The air smells faintly of burnt tallow mixed with a sharp hint of beeswax. You inhale deeply and realize that the faint sweetness masks hours of sweat, smoke, and more than a few burnt fingers. You probably won't survive long in this space without accidentally knocking over a vat of molten wax or tripping on stray wicks, but it's mesmerizing. A small, low table holds several vessels of molten wax, each tinted a different shade by natural pigments: red from madder root, blue from indigo, yellow from saffron. Apprentices hover nearby, stirring with long wooden paddles, trying to keep the mixture at the perfect temperature. Too hot, and the wax burns; too cool, and it won't pour smoothly. Historians still argue whether these color experiments were primarily aesthetic or served symbolic purposes, but either way, they reveal an attention to detail that elevates candles from mere light sources to objects of art. One apprentice points to a peculiar contraption, a wooden mold shaped like a miniature church steeple. Wax is poured in, cooled, and removed carefully, leaving a perfect replica of the original. A quirky tidbit: some masters experimented with embedding tiny objects inside candles, coins, beads, even miniature wax animals, so that the flame would reveal the secret as it burned. Imagine the surprise when a candle spits out a tiny wax horse in the middle of a dinner. The master chandler moves among them, checking their work, his hands swift and confident. He dips wicks in molten wax, straightens slightly crooked tapers, and murmurs corrections in a soft, almost hypnotic rhythm. Apprentices mimic him, learning through repetition, their concentration absolute. You notice the intricate dance of human and flame, one slip, one uneven stir, and the final candle is ruined. This combination of precision and artistry is what separates the ordinary from the masterful. Across the room, an apprentice experiments with scented candles, infusing wax with crushed herbs, petals, and oils. Lavender, rosemary, rose, and even more exotic scents like myrrh mingle in the warm air. These are for wealthier clients who want their homes to smell as refined as they look. Historians still argue whether the scents were intended for meditation, mood setting, or pure indulgence, but the effect is undeniably luxurious. A small group gathers around a demonstration of a slow drip technique, where wax is layered carefully to produce a gradient of colors. You lean closer, entranced by the flowing, molten ribbons as they solidify into a seamless spectrum. One quirky observation: apprentices sometimes compete to create the most visually striking drip patterns, turning a functional exercise into a game, though the masters pretend to scowl. In a corner, a small furnace keeps the wax pliable, humming gently. You watch as an apprentice removes a newly poured candle, smoothing imperfections while it's still warm. You can almost feel the pride swelling in his chest, even if it's tempered by the knowledge that the master is evaluating every angle, every curve. These moments, fleeting as they are, shape the apprentice's skill and self-confidence. The room grows warmer as afternoon sunlight filters through small windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the beams. Shadows stretch across the floor, catching in the waxy shapes of partially finished candles. You sense a rhythm here, a quiet pulse of labor, ambition, and artistry. Every candle carries not only light but history, skill, and the fingerprints of those who crafted it. Outside, the city moves on, the market still hums with energy, the wealthy shop for luxury candles, and somewhere, a new apprentice stumbles over a bundle of tallow tapers, already dreaming of the day he'll be trusted with the master's secret techniques. And you, walking quietly through the narrow streets, feel as if you've glimpsed a hidden heart of Prague, a place where flame, sweat, and creativity intertwine to illuminate both rooms and lives. You follow a faint trail of smoke curling from a tiny chimney, leading you to a dimly lit basement where the guild's secret experiments are whispered into existence. The air is thick, almost cloying, with the scent of melted tallow and beeswax, a mixture so pungent it clings to your clothes and hair. The flickering shadows of half-finished candles dance along the stone walls. You probably won't survive long here without a cough or a minor burn, but the atmosphere is intoxicating in a way that makes your senses stretch and your curiosity sharpen. Apprentices crouch around shallow vats, stirring, testing, and observing. One is carefully measuring a mix of tallow and beeswax, trying to improve burn time and reduce soot. Historians still argue whether these experimental blends were driven more by economy or innovation, but standing here, you sense the tension between necessity and ambition. Each apprentice knows a single mistake can ruin hours of work, or worse, draw the ire of the master. A master moves among them, inspecting, adjusting, and whispering advice that is half instruction, half warning. You notice one curious detail. Apprentices sometimes use tiny amounts of crushed shells, ashes, or even crushed stones to alter the texture of the wax. One quirky experiment from the basement legend involved adding crushed beetles to create a subtle red hue. Imagine the horror and fascination if that candle accidentally burned in a dining hall. The apprentices work silently, broken only by occasional murmurs and the clinking of tools. Every pour, every stir, every wick adjustment is a lesson in patience and precision. You watch a young apprentice dip a wick into molten wax, trying to coat it evenly before threading it through a mold. The room hums with quiet concentration, a rhythm of labor that feels almost sacred. Some candles are being prepared for religious purposes, thick, sturdy tapers designed to burn throughout long services. Others are delicate, meant for nobles' dining tables, scented with rare oils. You notice a peculiar ritual. A master will sometimes tap the wick 3 times before lighting a candle for inspection, a gesture said to ensure it burns true and fair. Historians still debate whether this was superstition, habit, or a genuine method of quality control, but it adds to the mystique of the trade. In one corner, an apprentice experiments with layered wax, carefully dripping colors to create stripes and gradients. You lean closer, entranced by the slow transformation from liquid to solid, watching the molten hues merge. One quirky tidbit: competitions sometimes arose among apprentices to produce the most visually stunning patterns, secretly judged by the masters when the room emptied. It's a small rebellion in a rigid system, a little spark of joy amid discipline. A faint draft sneaks through the stone walls, carrying with it the distant sounds of the city above, the clatter of carts, the murmur of voices, the occasional bark of a dog. Down here, time feels suspended. You can almost feel the centuries of accumulated knowledge in the room, the careful stirring, the whispered secrets, the repeated failures, and the small, hard-won victories. The apprentices work until the light shifts, and shadows lengthen across the floor, making the wax glow like molten jewels. You step back, your eyes tracing the lines of color, the curves of mold figures, the slow perfection of each taper. In this hidden chamber, you realize that every candle carries not just flame, but ambition, experimentation, and the quiet pride of those who create light from sweat and wax. As you climb the steps back to the streets above, the hum of Prague greets you once more, and you carry the image of this secret basement, a place of innovation, quiet competition, and artistry that pulses behind the city's visible life. Somewhere in these narrow streets, apprentices continue their experiments, dreaming of mastery, ambition burning as brightly as any candle flame. The streets above are quieter now, the hustle of the day replaced by the soft shuffle of evening. You trudge past the familiar stalls and shuttered windows, your eyes catching the glow of a few lingering candles in upper floor windows. Each flame tells a story, sometimes of devotion, sometimes of wealth, sometimes of someone simply trying to see their dinner table. You probably won't survive long in this world without noticing the layers of meaning hidden in even the simplest taper, but it's impossible not to be captivated. You duck into another side alley where a small group of journeymen gather. These are the intermediaries, neither apprentice nor master, bridging the gap between labor and legacy. They exchange tips, trade small batches of experimental wax, and sometimes boast of secret techniques they've picked up in distant towns. Historians still argue whether these networks were formalized or purely casual, but you can feel the undercurrent of camaraderie and competition mixing in the air. A master joins them, not to teach but to observe, and you notice the subtle power dynamics at play. One journeyman shows off a candle that burns without smoke, achieved by blending tallow with a hint of purified beeswax. Another flaunts a wax figurine embedded with tiny silver beads, intended to reveal itself only as the candle melts. Quirky, yes, but these little innovations reveal how even minor tweaks could elevate one craftsman above the rest. You move closer to a table where apprentices are experimenting with molds. There are dragons, cherubs, and abstract forms you can't quite identify. The molten wax is poured with precision, cooled, and then gently released, each piece a fragile, ephemeral creation. You remember the delicate figurines from the luxury shops and realize these basement experiments often become the templates for those high-end creations. A faint laughter escapes from a corner where two apprentices are attempting a flame duel, two candles placed side by side to see which burns longer and steadier. It's a small, harmless competition, though the occasional splash of wax or a toppled mold keeps them humble. Historians still debate whether these playful exercises contributed meaningfully to the craft or were simply morale boosters, but either way, they reveal a human side to the guild's rigid structure. The scent of herbs drifts past you: rosemary, sage, and something darker, almost smoky. You peek at a small vat where an apprentice is experimenting with infused wax designed for protection rituals. Apparently, sprinkling crushed herbs and tiny charms into a candle was believed to ward off misfortune. One quirky fact: some candles were even programmed with intentions, so that as they burned, they symbolically released the wishes of the owner into the air. Journeymen discuss travel as well: wax sources, distant tallow suppliers, even rumors of a guild in Vienna experimenting with colored drips. Each story hints at a broader, almost European network, with secrets and rivalries stretching far beyond Prague. You probably won't survive long in this world without absorbing some of that whispered lore, but it's fascinating to watch knowledge circulate quietly, like a hidden current beneath the visible city. You step back and take a deep breath. The evening air is cooler now, carrying the faint aroma of baking bread and fading candle smoke. Shadows lengthen across the cobblestones, stretching like ghosts of the day's labors. Every flicker, every glow, every carefully tended flame above you is a continuation of centuries-old craft, an unbroken chain from apprentice to master, from secret basement experiments to gilded shop fronts. A final glance at a narrow window shows a candle burning alone on a table, its glow steady and serene. You smile, recognizing that in this city, the smallest flame carries the weight of devotion, artistry, and centuries of history. Even the quietest candle can illuminate the soul of Prague if you pause long enough to notice. You wander deeper into the labyrinthine streets, guided by the faint scent of tallow and beeswax lingering on the evening breeze. The cobblestones are slick from a recent rain, reflecting the flickering candlelight from small windows above. You probably won't survive long navigating these alleys without tripping over a stray rope or dodging a horse-drawn cart, but the city has a rhythm that carries you forward almost hypnotically. Each step pulls you closer to the hidden workshops of the candle-making guilds, the secret heart of Prague where flame, craft, and ambition intertwine. Inside a low-ceilinged shop, you find rows of candles in every imaginable form and color. Some are plain tapers for everyday use, while others are lavishly decorated with gilded edges, intricate carvings, or embedded flowers. Apprentices move with quiet precision, polishing and inspecting, their hands streaked with wax in every hue. Historians still argue whether these decorative candles were meant as displays of wealth or purely artistic expression, but either way, they reflect an extraordinary attention to detail. A master leans over a new batch of scented tapers, rolling each in crushed lavender and rose petals. The scent is soft but persistent, filling the room with a calm, almost meditative atmosphere. One quirky tidbit: in some cases, the petals were arranged to spell out tiny messages, only revealed as the candle burned down. Imagine receiving a candle that whispers a secret confession as it melts, romantic or slightly alarming, depending on the message. You notice a corner where apprentices are experimenting with layered candles, pouring one color over another with the precision of a painter. Each layer must cool slightly before the next is added, or the colors bleed. Mistakes are inevitable, yet the failures are embraced as part of the learning process. A dropped wick, a slightly tilted mold, or a patchy pour becomes a lesson in patience, a reminder that mastery requires repetition, observation, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. The shop also hums with the occasional dispute over technique. Two apprentices debate whether tallow or beeswax produces a steadier flame, their voices low but firm. Historians still argue whether such rivalries were purely practical or fueled by ego, but the tension adds a dynamic energy to the otherwise serene workshop. You probably won't survive long in this debate without choosing a side, but watching it unfold is a fascinating glimpse into the guild's social structure. A small table holds experimental wicks, braided, twisted, and layered in patterns meant to control burn speed or flame height. The master demonstrates a subtle flick of the wrist, showing how a slight adjustment can transform a flickering candle into a reliable light source. One quirky observation: some masters preferred wicks dipped in a mixture of wax and crushed herbs, believing it improved the candle's character or even its luck. You watch as the apprentices mimic these motions, their concentration absolute. Outside, the evening deepens. Smoke curls from chimneys, carrying the smell of cooking fires and distant markets. You realize that the city's heartbeat is mirrored inside this workshop, layers of labor, scent, and color moving in rhythm. Every candle carries a story, some practical, some artistic, some magical. You can feel the history of Prague in the heat of the molten wax, in the deliberate movements of the apprentices, and in the faint, flickering light that reaches out from every window. As you step back into the street, the glow of shop fronts fading behind you, you understand that the candle-making guilds are not just about producing light, they are about shaping experience, controlling ambience, and passing down knowledge that will illuminate the city for generations. You probably won't survive long trying to master this craft yourself, but witnessing it is a privilege, a quiet thrill that settles into your senses like the lingering warmth of a candle flame. You turn another corner, guided less by sight than by the faint, warm glow and the lingering scent of tallow and beeswax that seems to follow you like a secret companion. The streets are narrower here, the buildings older, leaning in as if to confide something you weren't meant to hear. You probably won't survive long navigating these alleys without twisting an ankle or startling a dog, but there's a quiet magic in the shadows that makes every careful step feel like part of a ritual. Inside a modest workshop tucked behind a wooden door, the air is thick with heat and faint smoke. Apprentices huddle over small furnaces, pouring wax into delicate molds shaped like saints, animals, and mythic creatures. Historians still argue whether the more fantastical molds were purely decorative or held symbolic meaning in religious ceremonies, but you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity required to make molten wax take precise form. On a long table, several candles stand mid-cooling, each layer more vibrant than the last. One curious apprentice whispers about a failed experiment, a candle that sputtered excessively when burning, filling the room with a faint, smoky odor. Quirky and slightly hazardous, it's the kind of thing that becomes legend among apprentices, a cautionary tale passed down with a mix of dread and amusement. You notice the subtle hierarchy in the room. Younger apprentices handle basic tasks, stirring vats, trimming wicks, while older, more skilled hands tackle complex molds, layered colors, and scented blends. The master moves like a quiet conductor, offering guidance with a word, a gesture, or a faint nod, shaping the rhythm of labor without needing to raise his voice. You probably won't survive long ignoring the unspoken rules here, but observing them reveals a fascinating microcosm of guild life. One apprentice is experimenting with wax and herbs for a protective candle, carefully layering dried rosemary and tiny bits of parchment inscribed with symbols. This small, fragrant ritual creates a candle that burns with intention, a tiny talisman of hope or warding. Historians still debate whether such candles were meant for practical protection or psychological comfort, but there's no denying the sense of focus and reverence they inspire. In another corner, a master demonstrates the art of scent layering. He gently warms wax, adds drops of rose, lavender, and a hint of myrrh, then stirs slowly, inhaling the aroma with an almost meditative patience. One quirky observation: some apprentices sneaked in more exotic ingredients, tobacco, cinnamon, even crushed insects, to test reactions, delighting in the occasional eureka or mild disaster. You watch the mixture swirl and solidify, mesmerized by the delicate balance between fragrance and form. The workshop grows warmer as the evening deepens. Outside, the sounds of Prague soften into a lullaby of distant church bells and clattering carts. Shadows from half-finished candles dance across the stone walls, and you feel a strange sense of timelessness, as if these apprentices are merely the latest in a long line of hands shaping light from wax. Each movement, each pour, each careful layering carries not only flame but centuries of knowledge, care, and experimentation. You step back into the alley, feeling the warmth of the workshop recede but its lessons lingering. Every candle you've glimpsed, every technique, every scent is a thread woven into the fabric of Prague's hidden craft. You probably won't survive long forgetting it, but remembering will color your imagination, and perhaps, in a quiet way, illuminate your own appreciation for light. You follow the faint glow of lanterns up a winding staircase, each step echoing softly against the ancient stone walls. The air is thick with the mingling aromas of melting wax, charred wicks, and faint floral infusions, a scent that immediately presses itself into your memory. You probably won't survive long ignoring how intimately smell and craft intertwine in this world, but it's worth breathing in every detail. Each step feels like walking through history, a quiet procession linking centuries of candle makers with you as the unexpected witness. On the upper floor, the room opens into a larger studio. Here, the guild's masters convene with select apprentices to test experimental techniques and share innovations. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were formal councils or informal mentorship sessions, but the tension in the air suggests a combination of both. A faint clatter announces a master dropping a metal mold, and you see apprentices flinch. Discipline is strict, but the craft demands precision as much as obedience. A small table in the corner is covered with unusual tools, carved wooden molds, copper tongs, and tiny metal stamps. One apprentice demonstrates a new method for engraving delicate patterns into wax before it fully hardens. Quirky as it seems, the stamped impressions sometimes contained hidden messages, little secrets only revealed when the candle burned down to a certain point. You lean closer, fascinated by the subtlety and care. Nearby, a master manipulates a wick in molten wax, showing how slight twists and braids can control burn speed and flame steadiness. You probably won't survive long if you try this without guidance, but it's mesmerizing to watch. One apprentice sneaks a drop of scented oil into a batch, testing whether the aroma will carry further than usual. This small rebellion is quietly tolerated, adding life and unpredictability to an otherwise meticulous routine. You notice a small set of candles with embedded objects, tiny coins, thimbles, even small stones. These hidden treasure candles are meant to delight, surprise, or occasionally serve as wagers. Historians still debate how common this practice truly was, but in this moment, it feels like a playful rebellion against the strict guild hierarchy. You probably won't survive long ignoring the cleverness in such whimsical innovation, and you can't help smiling at the ingenuity. The masters and apprentices share quiet conversation, mostly about the quality of recent batches, suppliers of wax, and distant rumors of similar guilds in Nuremberg and Vienna. Occasionally, the discussion shifts to failures, candles that cracked, burned too quickly, or released an unpleasant odor. The room hums with a rhythm that is part evaluation, part ritual, part camaraderie. As evening deepens, you catch sight of a candle being poured in thin, alternating layers of black and white wax. The effect is mesmerizing, a hypnotic swirl that seems to pulse with life as it cools. You remember the basement experiments, the alleyway competitions, and the scented infusions, all of it culminating here in this quiet upper studio. Every candle is a story, a challenge, a blend of art, science, and human whimsy. You probably won't survive long without appreciating the dedication etched into every mold, every wick, every aromatic addition. Stepping back from the studio, you realize you've wandered through a city that glows not only with literal light but with centuries of ingenuity, rivalry, and devotion. Each flicker and flame carries the weight of human creativity, and you feel privileged to witness it, even as the shadows of Prague begin to stretch and yawn around you. You descend back into the lower streets, the cool night air pressing against your skin, carrying hints of bread baking and the faint tang of the Vltava River. You probably won't survive long ignoring how smells map a city in layers, but right now it's impossible not to follow the invisible trails left by candle shops, bakeries, and the occasional smoky tavern. The city has settled into a softer rhythm, the bustling daytime markets replaced by quieter footsteps, whispers, and the occasional creak of a cart rolling over uneven cobblestones. A small, secluded courtyard opens before you, and you notice a flickering lantern hanging from a wrought iron bracket. Beneath it, a few journeymen are testing candles outdoors, observing how the wind and humidity affect burn rate. Historians still argue whether these outdoor tests were part of formal guild regulations or simply practical experimentation, but the scene feels intimate, almost conspiratorial. You probably won't survive long in this world without paying attention to such small but crucial details, yet it's fascinating to watch. On a low table, you see a curious display of candles that are neither functional nor purely decorative. They seem designed to tell a story as they burn. One depicts a tiny castle that slowly melts to reveal a miniature forest inside. Another swirls in pastel layers, intended to mimic clouds dispersing at sunset. Quirky as these experiments are, they hint at a level of imagination that makes the candle more than light. It becomes a moving canvas. A master wanders among the journeymen, quietly taking notes and adjusting minor flaws in molds or wick placement. You notice subtle gestures, a hand brushing stray wax, a nod toward an apprentice who perfected a color gradient, a soft warning when someone rushes the pour. These tiny actions carry authority, but also care, showing that mastery is as much about guiding as it is about creating. Nearby, a young apprentice demonstrates a technique for layering scented wax to create an evolving fragrance as the candle burns. Lavender, citrus, and cedarwood emerge in sequence, a subtle olfactory story unfolding in time. Historians still debate whether scent layering was originally intended for spiritual, aesthetic, or purely practical purposes, but standing there, inhaling the combination, it feels like a small, intimate miracle. You notice a table with experimental wicks braided in unconventional ways. One wisp of a braid is dipped in tallow, another in beeswax, and a third in a mixture of both, intended to achieve a flame that adjusts itself to air currents. You probably won't survive long attempting this without instruction, yet it's mesmerizing to see the subtle interplay between material, technique, and environment. The courtyard's shadows stretch longer as a late moon rises, silvering the damp stones. Each candle test casts dancing patterns that seem almost alive, flickering and swaying in time with your heartbeat. You feel the weight of centuries of craft in these fleeting glimmers, every experiment a continuation of knowledge passed from master to apprentice, from one generation to the next. Stepping back from the courtyard, you reflect on the layers of Prague you've witnessed: hidden basements, bustling workshops, upper studios, and now this quiet experimental space under the night sky. You probably won't survive long without remembering these moments, yet in recalling them, you carry a faint warmth, the echo of flame, and the unspoken rhythm of a guild devoted to perfecting light in a world that thrives on shadow. You wander toward the edges of the city, where the cobblestones thin and the smell of wax mingles with the damp, earthy scent of the riverbank. You probably won't survive long ignoring how the elements shape craft: wind, moisture, and temperature all conspiring with human hands, but tonight, it's part of the immersive lesson the candlemaking guild has offered without a single word. Shadows stretch long and thin, flickering in the light of distant street lamps and occasional candle windows, reminding you that this city is a living, breathing organism of light and labor. Along the river, a group of apprentices test floating candles, letting them drift in shallow water while observing how the flame interacts with the gentle current. Historians still argue whether floating candles were practical markers for boats or merely aesthetic experiments, but you can't deny their quiet charm. Quirky, whimsical, and slightly impractical, these tiny lanterns perform a dance that feels like liquid magic, and you probably won't survive long resisting the urge to lean in closer. Nearby, a master explains the subtle differences between tallow and beeswax for these waterbound experiments. Tallow burns brighter but produces more smoke. Beeswax is cleaner, steadier, and, curiously, has a faint honey scent that persists even outdoors. One apprentice chuckles, recalling the time a floating candle tipped over mid-test, setting a tiny ripple of wax adrift, an unexpected, messy, and oddly poetic failure. You notice the master smiles at the memory, a small acknowledgement that imperfection is part of mastery. Further along, the guild has arranged an impromptu display of candles atop stone pedestals, each illuminated to reflect various techniques, carved patterns, layered colors, embedded herbs, and tiny surprises waiting to reveal themselves as the wax melts. You probably won't survive long absorbing every detail, yet the human ingenuity packed into each flame is mesmerizing. Historians still debate whether such displays were meant for guild prestige, market advertisement, or purely as artistic experimentation, but tonight, the distinction seems irrelevant, the candles speak for themselves. A faint breeze lifts and scatters the aroma of lavender, cedar, and faintly burnt tallow across the riverbank. You inhale it deeply, realizing that scent has become a memory anchor, tying you to the centuries of apprenticeship, experimentation, and quiet rivalry that shaped Prague's candle makers. One quirky observation: some apprentices experimented with tiny charms or notes inside the wax, intending to surprise a future recipient, a playful, intimate practice almost lost to time. You trace the edges of the floating display, letting your fingers hover over the reflections in the water, watching light bend and shimmer. You probably won't survive long ignoring the delicate balance required, the wick's placement, the density of the wax, the alignment of layers. It's a meticulous art, yet infused with whimsy, humor, and the occasional disaster that everyone secretly cherishes. As the night deepens, the city grows quieter. Street noises fade, footsteps become rare, and only the faint flicker of candles punctuates the darkness. The guild members begin to pack up, extinguishing the flames one by one. You realize that this journey through Prague's candlemaking guilds is both a history lesson and an intimate meditation on light, craft, and human patience. Every experiment, failure, and triumph has been an invitation to witness centuries of knowledge distilled into flame. You probably won't survive long forgetting the patterns, aromas, and small, vivid moments you've encountered tonight. The city itself seems to exhale, releasing the collective memory of countless candles burned, perfected, and sometimes catastrophically failed, leaving behind a faint warmth that lingers even as the streetlights dim and the river swallows the last reflections of molten wax. As you settle into the quiet of your own space, imagine the flickering shadows of Prague's alleys gently stretching across your walls. The city has slowed, the guild has packed away its tools, and the soft residual scent of beeswax, tallow, and faint herbs drifts like a memory you can almost touch. You probably won't survive long carrying every detail consciously, yet the images, the warmth, and the tiny playful accidents linger in the corners of your mind, like embers glowing softly long after the fire has gone out. Breathe slowly and let the rhythm of the candle-making day you've witnessed seep into your own heartbeat. The apprentices, the masters, the curious experiments, they are no longer just distant figures in history. They have become companions guiding you through shadows, light, and the delicate patience of creation. You can almost feel the molten wax in your hands, the subtle vibration of a wick catching fire, the layered scents unfolding as if narrating a gentle story just for you. Historians still argue whether the more esoteric techniques were practical or symbolic, but tonight, you don't need an answer. You only need to experience the subtle magic that permeates every corner of that ancient craft. Let the city dissolve around you. The river, the alleys, the flickering workshops all recede into a calm hum that mirrors your own slowing thoughts. Tiny imperfections, small disasters, moments of laughter and quiet triumph, they are all part of the human story, and they have a way of following you into dreams if you allow them to. Quirky, unpredictable, and entirely alive, they whisper that creativity, patience, and warmth are timeless gifts, waiting quietly to be remembered. As your eyelids grow heavy, carry the gentle glow with you. Imagine the last candle burning low, its wick flickering before surrendering to the night, leaving behind a faint aroma and a soft memory of light. You probably won't survive long forgetting the wonder of such dedicated craft, yet now, wrapped in the quiet hum of your own room, it is safe to let the glow fade slowly, comfortably, as you drift.